Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's forum. My name is Dr. Shelley Leanne. I'm a lecturer here at the Kennedy School of Government. I teach the course on United Nations and Human Rights. We're here tonight to talk about modern slavery, a very important topic given human rights and the concern for human rights around the world. More than 50 years ago, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights stated that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all of their forms. It is very appropriate that we are gathered here today to discuss modern slavery, because this past Saturday, December 2nd, marked the United Nations International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. There are 27 million people working under various forms of slavery in the world today. They include people that pick sugarcane in the Dominican Republic, make charcoal used in Brazil's steel industry, and who work as prostitutes all over the world. The CIA estimates that 45,000 women and children are smuggled into the United States each year to work in sweatshops, on farms, and in prostitution. Children can be purchased for $2,000 in Thailand and for as little as $40 in the Sudan. We are going to hear tonight from a very esteemed panel that can shed some light on slavery around the world and tell you how you can get involved. Our panel tonight includes, beginning directly to my left, Jay Williams, a second year at Harvard College, who went to the Sudan last summer and purchased over 4,000 people held in slavery. Next to him, we have Francis Bach, a 21-year-old native of the Sudan. He was a family slave for 10 years before he could be freed. Next to him, we have Jesse Sage, also a Harvard graduate, who began his career by working for the American Anti-Slavery Group. In 1999, Mr. Sage organized the first national abolitionist conference since the Civil War. And next to him, we have Wendy Patton, who is the director of the National Security Council's Multilateral and Humanitarian Affairs at the White House. She also serves as one of the key administration members coordinating the U.S. government efforts to combat trafficking on women and children. She is a graduate of Harvard Law School and spent many evenings in the forum as a student. Before we begin, we will go straight to the video. It's going to be a 5-minute Dateline video, Dateline NBC, which focuses on slavery today with an emphasis in the situation in the Sudan.
You may think that slavery is something that exists only in our history books, but we've heard something else. Reports that slavery is still very real, that women and children are being captured and sold into slavery, that heartbroken parents are facing an agonizing choice when they learn there is only one way to get their children back.
You are bought, sold, and bred. You are the property of another man. He is your master.
It is a crime from another century. Human beings bought and sold like cattle, forced to work at a master's whim, raped, branded, beaten, even maimed to prevent escape. Unimaginable, but as we discovered, true. Because in this corner of the world, slavery still exists. And yet it is an injustice that is virtually unknown, because this remote village is in Sudan, the largest but one of the least known countries in Africa. Here, along a tributary of the Nile, the native Dinka live as they always have, their lives centered on family and cattle. And on Sundays, they pray for deliverance, for an end to a bloody 13-year-old civil war. The Islamic fundamentalist government in the north has declared a jihad, a holy war against the Christians and traditional believers of the south. And human rights groups say in this war, Northerners are taking Southerners as slaves.
Hundreds of men on horseback charged on people, and we ran away in a panic. My wife was taken and my children too. I was powerless to do anything.
Like others here, Apin lives in fear of a train. Villagers tell Dateline Army trains pass through the South several times a year. They're escorted by Arab militias who abduct innocent civilians. Acholdut Dang says she recently escaped after 9 months as a slave in the North. But her twin 6-year-old boys were sold to another master, and she doesn't know where they are.
Do you believe that your sons are also being held as slaves?
Of course, they are slaves.
What happened to your leg?
This is from the ropes we were tied with, and they beat our necks with sticks.
She told us she was raped repeatedly and is now pregnant by her Arab master. It seems no one is too young to be a slave. Some of these Dinka children say they were held for more than 5 years, forced to tend cattle and goats, fed only table scraps. Some even ate grass to survive.
We were forced to herd livestock, and if we complained, they'd beat us.
Perhaps no story was more heart-wrenching than that of 27-year-old Abouk Marone Care. She was unable to see the men who raped her and her mother, the men who took away her 2 children. Abouk is blind.
They told me the children were taken away by an Arab on horseback.
The desire is that all of Sudan should become Islamic.
Sam Cotton is the great-great-great-grandson of American slaves and director of a U.S.-based anti-slavery organization. He says since the 1989 military coup of Muslim leader Omar al-Bashir, there's been a dramatic increase in slavery in Sudan.
This has a racial context to it. This has a belief that I'm enslaving an inferior group of people. The African is a subhuman. He's a beast of burden.
I did not know where they were, so I searched for them aimlessly for 9 months.
When he finally found his family, the reunion was bittersweet. His wife had been raped repeatedly. His daughter was crippled.
Look at her leg. She was not born like this.
Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch Africa, say what we discovered is all too typical. They estimate thousands of people have been taken as slaves in Sudan. Others here pray and wait, but fear the world has forgotten them. Because the bitter irony remains, the train will be back. The militias will raid again. And even those who have bought their loved ones' freedom could lose them again next time.
As for the U.S. response, there were congressional hearings on the reports earlier this year. But the United States severed economic and military ties with Sudan after the 1989 coup. Therefore, human rights groups say it will take stronger measures by the United Nations to force the Sudanese government to put an end to this modern-day slavery.
We'll begin our discussion, just so you know the way things will flow tonight, with each of our panelists giving a brief comments about modern slavery. At the end of that, we will open up to discussion and answers. There are 2 microphones down on the floor where we will take questions from the audience. And we'll begin with Jay to my left.
Good evening. Every time I watch that video, I just really get chills. And because, I mean, what's going on in Sudan is really terrible. And I think it's appropriate that I kind of start the discussion with, in the tradition of antebellum abolitionists, with an apology that we have to be here and to be talking about slavery in the 21st century. Many of us are under the understanding that slavery ended in 1865 with the Emancipation Proclamation, but as has already been said, over 27 million people live in slavery today. My involvement with fighting slavery began about a year ago, so this is somewhat of an unhappy anniversary, if you will. I was at a panel very similar to this over in the Starr Auditorium here at the Kennedy School of Government when I found about the details of modern-day slavery. And as a result, got involved and started working with the American Anti-Slavery Group as a modern-day abolitionist, if you will. And continued to intern with the anti-slavery group throughout the school year. And this summer, I got an email while I was in DC, got an email from Jesse that asked me if I wanted to go to Sudan and see with my own eyes, see firsthand the ravages and the terrors of modern-day slavery. And I said yes, and here I am today in somewhat of a very tough situation. I'm speaking on behalf of hundreds of thousands of people who have no voice in the international community. And it's a bit difficult for me to be here because that's an awesome, awesome load, one that I have taken on, but one that still makes me challenge everything that I believe in and everything that I do, because we have so many people that are being forced to be slaves, to be laborers in the homes of other people, and to convert to different religions. Our women and children are beaten on a daily basis. Our women are raped, and the men of Sudan are often killed upon at the time of a slave raid. So I would like to share a couple stories, if you wouldn't mind, about the people that I interviewed while I was in Sudan on a mission to purchase the freedom for 4,435 slaves. I'd like to share the story of Arek Kir Manuel, who is a 32-year-old woman, the mother of 7 children, who, when her village was raided about 3 years ago, she was ripped from her husband and ripped from her family and 6 of her 7 children, and told that she was going north to a land that she's never been to before to be a slave. And as she marched north with her only possession that she still had, her baby boy that she carried in her arms, she got to a point where the slave raiders told her to give up her baby boy. They were going to be separated. And like any good mother, she refused and said no, after which the raiders set her body on fire and took her baby boy from her after slashing her neck. Somehow she survived. Somehow she mustered enough strength to carry on, to get to the north, only to enter into the life of slavery, to be raped and beaten on a near daily basis. And also tell the story of Yakinyan Adju, a 12-year-old boy, and Mawiya Mahir Bol, an 8-year-old boy who considered themselves blood brothers, who were taken together and forced to march to the north from their land in the south. And as most of the young boys are, they were forced to tend to cattle and to goats. And one day when Mawiya didn't clean the goat pen to his master's liking, his master cut off one of his fingers. And Yak, who one day was too sick to go out and to clean the goat pens and to take the goats to get water, the master, in punishment, chopped off the fingers of his right hand. And now I'm here to tell the story to all of you so that we can make a difference and help put an end to this terrible, terrible travesty.
Thank you. Francis?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Francis Burke. I have been living in this great country for only 1 year now. I apologize for my English, but I'm proud to speak. I speak for my people. My people are being killed, and my people are being made slaves. I want to begin with a special thanks to Jay Williams. Jay went to Sudan in September to help slave my brother and sister. Jay, you are a very special person. I also want to say thank you, all the students and teachers from my school, Boston Evening Academy. I like my school very much. What I'm learning will help me to fight to free my people. And thank you, Harvard student, for coming to hear me. I'm 21 years, the same age as many of you. I want to ask you to think about what you were doing a few years ago. In 1996, I was lapsed. I could not be here, even you invited me to come to Harvard. Let me tell you my story. I was born in Southern Sudan. In 1986, when I was 7, my mother sent me to the market to sell some eggs and beans. I never saw my mother again. At the market, a malicious soldier attacked hundreds of Arabs on horse, on camel, came shooting. They shot the people in the head. They cut off the head with a sword. The streets were a river of blood. They took many children as slaves. They took me many children and put me in a big basket tied to the donkey. One girl had seen her parents killed, and she could not stop crying. So they took her out in the basket and shot her in the head. Her younger sister cried out, so they cut off her foot. I was given as slaves to Jim Abdullah. He took me to his family, and he beat me, all the family, even children too. And they laughed, and they called me Abid, black slave. For 10 years, they beat me every morning. They made me slave with animals, and they gave me very bad food. They said I was an animal. For 10 years, nobody loved me. For 10 years, they hid me. One day, I asked my master a question. Why do you call me Abid, and why do you feed me very bad food and made me slave with animal all the time? My master said, how do you learn that question? He said, never ask me that question again. And he beat me and beat me. When I was 17, I decided to escape. I would rather die than be a slave. I ran away, and I came to police station. Please help me. I told police, but they made me their slaves to do work for them all the day. After 2 months, I ran away. An Arab driver hid me in his lorry to come to Khartoum, capital. When I got to Khartoum, I didn't know anybody, but some of my people, the Dinka, who had lived there, took me in. And I told them my story. And they could not believe I escaped. But they were very happy. Then 4 days later, the secret police came to my place. And they said, are you telling a story you are slaves who escaped? I said, no, because I was scared. But they took me and put me in the jail. There was no light. I was just 18. I had no tire, and I had no lawyer. What was my crime? I was escaped slave. And the government of Sudan did not want me to tell my story. After 5 months, the Sudanese police let me out, and I escaped to Egypt, in Cairo. I went to United Nations Refugees Office. In August of 1999, I flew to the United States. I was living in Iowa when the American anti-slavery group found me. I am a lucky man. I am free, but my people are dying. And around the world, there are 27 million people, slaves, who cannot speak. Today, I must speak for them. We have a question. Why is President Clinton silent about slavery in Sudan? And why is the world silent? This is a country that is free slaves, but my people are still slaves. When I was living as slave to Jim Abdullah, I would lay awake at night. I could not sleep. I would think how I am going to be free. Is someone going to come to free me? Today in Sudan and around the world, there are children cannot sleep at night. They lay awake and they lay in the ground. They're waiting for strong people to come to freedom. You have, a student of Harvard. You are strong. And you have a big voice and big arms. You can free slaves. I ask you to join us in our fight. And there is so much you can do. You are Harvard as the children of America's dream. But what good is dream if you do not help others live their dream of freedom? Thank you.
Jesse?
It's a tough act to follow, but I thank you for having me. I want to thank all the interns from the American Anti-Slavery Group and people at the ARCO Forum who helped put this together, as well as the groups that co-sponsored. And if I can follow on that, I want to say that we're here tonight, actually, not to talk about what happened to Francis, really, or what you saw on the TV screen or what Jay saw, but we're actually really here to talk about you. Or maybe I should say we're here to talk about us and about what we're going to do with our freedom, how we use our freedom. I think Americans like to think about freedom in terms of rights and privileges and possibilities. But the subject of tonight's panel reminds us that freedom is really about responsibility. And the knowledge that slavery is alive and well today in the 21st century means that for us, we have to exercise our freedom to help set other people free. In fact, I would argue that freedom is our burden. It means that we have a special responsibility to millions of people who live in slavery around the world. Tonight, it's my burden to give you a brief overview of modern-day slavery beyond what you just heard and saw in the Sudan. And I have a few key points I want to make about modern-day slavery. The first is that slavery is a global phenomenon. It is found on every continent and in virtually every country. Its abusers and its victims represent an array of ethnic and religious groups. In fact, as you'll hear more from the panelists after me, involuntary servitude or slavery is once again a problem here in the United States. In fact, our organization is working on a case of slavery that occurred recently, not even a 5-minute walk from this auditorium, right in Harvard Square. So lest you think that slavery is somehow a problem in distant, far-off countries, it's not true. It's increasingly a problem here. I also want to say that we at the American Anti-Slavery Group define slavery very strictly and narrowly as forced work for no pay under the threat of violence. And even with this strict definition, as you heard, the conservative estimate is that 27 million people are estimated to live in bondage around the world. It's 27 million people. I think it's an incredible figure. It's more than ever before in human history. And it's overwhelmingly women and children, I would add. Slavery today is in some ways very different from the kind of slavery we know from American history that we all studied about. Slaves, first of all, were once very valuable. The average price of a slave in the American South in today's terms was something on the order of $60,000, like a very fancy car. Today, with a massive population boom, especially in regions of extreme poverty, slaves are plentiful. In fact, disposable. They can be bought for as little actually as $12. You may have heard of a young boy named Iqbal Masih who was a slave in Pakistan forced to weave carpets. And he actually escaped and became a spokesman, got the Reebok Human Rights Award. He was actually bought for $12. The other difference is that the profit margins off slavery historically weren't very high. They were about 5% a year. But today, masters around the world make an enormous profit off slave labor. And also, because there's a surfeit of slaves, when slaves become ill, they're simply discarded. The classic example of that is, you may have heard about the sexual slavery in Thailand, where women and young girls are forced to work in brothels. There was a very interesting study done that showed they had actually a ledger for the brothel owner. And it came out that the costs, let's say, were $1,000 a month to maintain a girl who was a slave, and the profit each month was $10,000. So it's wildly profitable. And when that girl comes down with HIV or another sexually transmitted disease, there are hundreds more where she came from, so she's simply discarded. I think that's a contrast to what we saw and what we know from American history, where slaves were cared for when they were young, when they were ill, and when they were old. Finally, the last main point I want to make is that slavery touches our lives in many ways. And because we live in a global economy, which drives the demand for cheap labor, for cheap goods, and consequently cheap labor, products of slavery actually touch us here in the United States. And I just want to give a few quick examples. It was mentioned briefly in the introduction that there's a slavery in Brazil. A quick example of what happens is that men, particularly in poor areas, are promised a good job, and they say, people tell them, get on the truck and we'll take you for a good job. And so they take the trucks hundreds of miles out into the middle of the rainforest. And I know people are very upset about the rainforest being chopped down and the environmental effects of that, but it's actually being chopped down with slave labor. And the people arrive there and they said, you owe us for the car ride here and the food that we gave you. Now start cutting, and they point a gun at them. And the rainforest that they cut down is made into charcoal, which actually goes into aluminum, which is in the cars that we drive, maybe in the parts of that in the chairs that you're sitting in. Another example is in India, where there are millions of children, particularly trapped in debt bondage. They're basically security against a family loan. And when the family can't pay off the loan, the children are forced to go to work. I mentioned briefly that the children work in the carpet industry and weave carpets that are imported to the US and are found in many homes in America. They also roll sweet beady cigarettes. I know a lot of teenagers are smoking the beadies. And you should know, a 60 Minutes too did an expose about half a year ago on the beady industry in India and showed they actually had footage of 10-year-old girls rolling these cigarettes. So if you want a reason to really kick the habit, it's because those goods which are being sold here were made by child slaves. And finally, as I said, there's cases of bondage here right in the United States. And in fact, one of our associate directors recently published an article in the Boston Globe on slavery in the United States. I think many of you may have a copy of it. So to summarize briefly, slavery today has become a quasi-industrialized institution in many parts of the world. It's a brutal but efficient and very profitable process of entrapment, exploitation, and abandonment. Slaves are lured and abducted from their homes, they're psychologically and physically intimidated, and they're forced to work in dehumanizing conditions and then discarded when they're too ill to work. But let me just say in conclusion that what I said at the beginning, we're here to talk about you and what you can do and about how we will use our freedom to help these people. And I want to tell you there are many, many ways, as Francis said, that you can help make a difference. I'll be happy to talk about it more during the question period. But I just want to say that educate yourself. This is the beginning of an education that many of us, Jay and myself, happened onto this issue. We knew nothing about it before. Our lives were transformed and we learned about it. I would encourage you to go to our webpage, antislavery.com, to learn more. And ultimately, I want to encourage you to become an abolitionist. Because when you do, you'll be able to say, in the famous words of Harriet Tubman, I've heard their groans and sighs, and I've seen their tears, and I would give every drop of blood in my veins to set them free. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy Patton.
Hi, good evening. I'm glad to be here tonight to talk about the problem of trafficking in women and children. First, what are we talking about? Thai women enslaved in garment factories in Los Angeles, Mexican men, women, and children, all hearing impaired, forced to peddle trinkets on the streets of New York City. Latvian women taken to work in the sex industry in Chicago, and told that if they tried to escape, their families would be killed. Young women and girls from Mexico forced to work as prostitutes in South Florida and the Carolinas. These are just a few egregious cases occurring here and around the world in which people, principally women and children, have been trafficked. Our experience working on this problem has made it abundantly clear to us that trafficking is both an international crime issue and a human rights problem. It is increasingly about organized crime networks that operate transnationally in order to profit from the trade in human beings. It's also an affront to human dignity. We've seen the horrible reality of women and children who are ruthlessly exploited by those who coerce or lure them into very dehumanizing situations. This is the modern-day slave trade, with vulnerable women and children as the primary victims. The U.S. government has led a concerted effort to combat trafficking in women and children around the world. Really, we were confronted with this problem here at home in a very immediate way with the kind of cases that I just described, some of which I'm sure many of you have heard of, but also abroad. And we felt we simply had to do something to respond. With the leadership of the President and the First Lady, but also the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, we've led an interagency effort to bring this issue to the fore and to make it a priority to stop traffickers and to help their victims. The core of the U.S. government's anti-trafficking strategy, which is now reflected in work that's being done internationally, involves three key principles. Prosecution, which is about holding traffickers accountable for their crimes. Protection and assistance for victims, which involves accessible services and a range of forms of protection for people who have been trafficked. And then prevention, which primarily focuses on public education programs as well as more targeted programs to raise awareness among women and children about the tactics that traffickers use to lure them into their trafficking schemes. I just want to touch briefly on some of the key efforts that we've been involved in, both at home and around the world. The Attorney General, together with the Secretary of Labor, has created a worker exploitation task force, which is coordinating our domestic prosecutions of trafficking cases. That task force was set up in 1998. We're involved in doing training of law enforcement around the world, from the Ukraine to Thailand to Bulgaria. We've been involved in coordinating a public education program in Poland and in the Ukraine. We've been funding non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, who are providing services and advocacy on behalf of victims in India. We have increased economic development programs for women in many parts of the world to expand their economic opportunities so that hopefully they will be less vulnerable to traffickers. We are involved in funding a pilot project with a network of community-based organizations in the Los Angeles area who are working with Asian victims of trafficking. The group is called the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, and they're working to provide emergency shelter, counseling, and medical care to trafficking victims in the LA area. We've established a bilateral working group with the government of Italy, where we're working together to share ideas because we both have similar source countries, as well as Italy being a transit country for women into the United States. This past March, the United States and the Philippine governments co-hosted an Asia-wide conference in Manila called the Asian Regional Initiative Against Trafficking, which was attended by governments and NGOs from all over Asia and the Pacific. And at that meeting, we developed an Asian Regional Action Plan to combat trafficking. That's just a snapshot of the extensive effort that we have launched to prosecute traffickers, protect and assist victims, and to implement programs to prevent trafficking. I just want to end by noting two key achievements this year. One is the enactment of the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000, which was signed into law by the President at the end of October. It's landmark legislation that addresses the problem of trafficking, both here in the US and abroad. And we've also concluded a UN protocol on trafficking in persons, especially women and children, that will be signed next week in Palermo as part of a convention on transnational organized crime. The significance of this protocol is that it is the first international instrument that requires countries to criminalize trafficking, and it also sets a framework for the protection of and assistance to victims. So I'll end there.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we'll open this up to questions from the floor, so definitely feel free to move to the 2 microphones, and we will take questions. Begin here. Be sure to introduce yourself. And
sure. The Reverend Eugene Rivers from Boston. As a practical matter, there is a Pan-African Congress of Churches that have been working on the AIDS issue for the last couple of years now. And I'd like to know what would be, practically speaking, 3 things that black churches in the U.S. could do around the issue at the level of advocacy and assistance. Very simple.
Who would like to take that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there's been no successful civil rights movement in the United States without the support of the black church. So I think it's absolutely vital. Off the top of my head, the most important thing you can do first is to educate your congregations. The second most important thing you can do is pressure the government. As was mentioned by Francis, President Clinton has not spoken out on the issue of slavery in Sudan, although Dr. Susan Rice, who's the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, finally just went to southern Sudan 2 weeks ago and met with redeemed slaves and said the world has to wake up to this issue. And I think the black church can be instrumental in making whoever becomes the next president have to address this. And I have to say that both candidates have ducked answering the question of slavery in Sudan. Finally, it's not just Sudan, and there are even cases here. So a general awareness and action to say that this is, even in the case of involuntary servitude here, a civil rights issue, I think is key.
Follow-up question very quickly. To the representative from the National Security Council, why has Bill Clinton ducked and dodged on the issue, by which I mean specifically taking a high-profile position to unequivocally condemn by name the slavery that's going on in Africa?
Well, our emphasis has been on the need for the government of Sudan to end the practice of slavery and to put in place mechanisms that would allow for enforcement and prevention. And as Jesse said, Susan Rice was out there and spoke to this issue directly. We have opposed it very strongly, for example, in the UN Human Rights Commission. And
who's we?
We, the U.S. government, okay, and have led efforts at the UN to try to expose slavery along with other human rights issues in Sudan.
But why hasn't President Clinton spoken?
As I said, we've been working to try to get them to end the practice, and I know that he has, in correspondence, talked about the work that we've done on this and our desire to see the practice end and to call it by its name, which is slavery, and not to use terms like, I think, what are some of the other terms, Jesse, people have used, abduction or involuntary, something like that, but to call it slavery. I mean, obviously, I hear what you're saying, which is there is a need for a forceful response.
Okay, so you're saying then that President Clinton hasn't given one?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we have worked hard to say that we need to end this practice and to try to put in place mechanisms that do that. And we're, from what I've been told, we have also, we're working hard to make, there's a committee in Sudan which is working to try to find and free slaves, which has not freed very many, and we're going to continue to press to make sure that that becomes more effective as well.
Okay, let me actually ask a question here. I teach the United Nations and Human Rights, and last year we actually covered the topic of Sudan. And a British ambassador came, I asked him to come speak in our class about this, and I was a little shocked, actually, that his whole spin was there is no slavery in the Sudan. That he did use the word abductions, but he came down basically saying this is a cultural practice. So to what degree does that permeate the discourse, either in the U.S. government or in other countries, and is that part of the problem, part of the lack of response in this issue?
You guys were at the UN, actually. Jay, just by way of introduction, the Sudan was up for a seat on the UN Security Council back in October. And actually, Jay and Francis spoke at a press conference there, demanding that this would be an outrage to have a government that allows its militiamen to take civilians into slavery. And Sudan was initially a shoo-in, but that press conference actually motivated the State Department to act, and actually Richard Holbrooke helped lead the fight to keep Sudan off the Security Council. It was an upset victory. So I'll let Jay talk about that.
Yeah, I guess the easy way out is to call it a cultural practice, and because then we can duck and dive it and not get involved. But the fact of the matter is that it's not a traditional cultural thing that exists in Sudan. It's a result of political and religious result of this ongoing civil war that's been going on in Sudan for over 50 years now.
17 years.
The recent government of Sudan, 17 years. But in 1989, there was a coup d'etat of the government, and a radical group that is made up of people who subscribe to the Islamic faith, but it is a very radical group, took control in a coup d'etat, and as a result has declared a jihad or holy war on the Christian and animist South. So this definitely is not something that exists, that has existed with relation in Mauritania. It is a more, I guess, cultural practice, slavery in Mauritania that is, but in Sudan that's absolutely not the case.
Can I just say one more thing?
Certainly.
To use a terrible expression, let's call a slave a slave. I mean, I think it's quite clear what's going on. You heard Francis's story. To deny it, I think, is insulting, and somehow to say, oh, it's their cultural is in its own way maybe racist, one might say. And I think all of you have an important thing you can do today. You have a representative of President Clinton right here on the panel, and you can let her, and she'll tell her boss, know that you're angry about this and that you want him to speak. So I'm encouraging you to come up, and even the high school students here, give her that message. Let her bring it back to the president and tell him, you have another 50 days, let's speak out on this.
Okay. We're also going to use the 2 microphones upstairs, so if anyone upstairs would like to ask a question, please move to the microphones. Let's take a question here.
Hi, my name is Ariel Lublin from the Graduate School of Education. And as you've started to address, this slavery, particularly in Sudan, is the area I'm most aware of, is embedded in much larger issues, political, economic, historic, etc. And what I've heard about the practice of redeeming slaves in Sudan is that it's a controversial issue, even among those who are committed to freeing slaves, because it can be argued that it provides an economic incentive for those who are slave trading to continue to capture slaves. So I'd like you to address that either together or separately, that particular practice, and then how we here can work to deal with the larger issues in which slavery is embedded.
Okay.
Yeah. My participation in the mission into Sudan was directly for the purpose of redeeming slaves. In other words, purchasing the freedom for slaves. And it is a controversial topic, but there's just a couple points that for me at least has eliminated the controversy. And that is that, first of all, the slavery in Sudan is not economic. There is no economic need for the slaves in the north. The slaves are being taken from the south and forced to go to the north under the jihad and due to this civil war that's been going on for more than 50 years now. So, and one way that we can prove this, and that it's not economically based, is that when these villages are raided, the men are killed. And that obviously wouldn't be a good tactic to kill all the men if you needed a labor supply in the north. In addition, I guess there's other reasons, but the most basic and fundamental thing, I guess, about redeeming slaves is the fact that if your mother or your son or daughter was a slave, being taken from your home and forced to do this, terrible living this terrible lifestyle in the North, I think unilaterally we'd want someone to purchase the freedom for them. And that's been the position of the people in the South. This is not a solution to the problem. We understand that. We're not going to be able to purchase them back one by one. I mean, for like all the slaves in Sudan. But it is a temporary solution. One of the things that we can all do, first of all, and I think is very important, is that now we all know that there's slavery in Sudan. We all know that there's over 27 million slaves in the world. So we're all empowered to be abolitionists, to go out and tell everyone that we know that this exists and that we all have an obligation with our freedom to fight for the freedom of others by contacting your congressmen, contacting your senators, and writing letters, mobilizing churches, leading protests, contacting the anti-slavery group for further information and checking out our website. But we all know at least that slavery exists and we're empowered to say something.
Francis, do you have a perspective on that, the practice of redeeming slaves? Does that provide an economic motive?
Well, that was a good question, but I'm really not clear about it. But what I know is what the CSI doing, Christian Solidarity International. That's I was just heard about it was in May when I met with the guy who used to go to Southern Sudan, John Abner. Mm-hmm. And he told me I used to go even your village where we were slave in 1986. And I couldn't believe. I said, if you go, I will give you a message from my parents. Go and check out of them. If you find one of my parents, I believe that you go to my village. And he took my family name, and he went. When he came back, he said, I went to your village, but I heard your parents was being killed, and I find what of your uncle. And he said, now I pray like, the first book, it was 3,000 slaves he will redeem. I don't know, that was the first before he goes to jail. When I think about it, this, what he's doing, I think is important to us to get our children back, because the slaves in Sudan today, the children will be forced to go to the north. When you want to take your child, like Jay told you, you have to pay money to get your child back, or your wife, or whatever you took with you, like the son was talking. They have a lot who are slaves, and the Arabs say, we bought these children with the money, and we need our money back. But we, Southern Sudanese people, we don't have money. We are poor. We don't work. So we say American, we say Christian, and we raise our hand, we say we need people to come to free these people. And we have a lot of people who are abolitionists, the rest is life to go to Southern Sudan, and redeem slave back. And I think this is a good way that it can help us to be free, because we're speaking again to talk to government, human rights in the United States. And I repeat this question like the same question I told you before, why the Clinton was silent. Because this is a country that makes a lot of people and the freedom, and he was silent about Sudan. And this is the other way that we can be free. If we have people like J. William, when in September, he freed 4,435 slaves. That was a good way. We bought a slave back, like you go to a store and buy like a T-shirt for $30 or $35. There was a cause of person in Southern Sudan if you want to get a slave back. I don't know, there was around 15,000 Sudanese pounds. There was another way we count. So I think for me, this is not really answer what you guys looking for. This is for my untranslated what I know. But this is, I think, the ways is they help more, and they show us that we are people who really do care to free us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's go to this microphone.
Hi, I'm a student. I go to school at Francis Bach, and being a high school student, we just recently found out about this, and this is educating me actually, because a lot of this I didn't know. And I'm quite sure a lot of high schools, a lot of younger students don't know about this. So I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can get the message out to a lot of younger people about this, and in what way can we contribute in helping to stop this? Help his.
Sure. First of all, I want to again focus that it's a global problem.
Well, global,
yes.
Global anything.
I should say the people, and those of you who have newsletters can read about this. I know a lot of newsletters were handed out, but some of the people who've done the most on this are fifth graders. There was a class in Denver, Colorado that happened to see an article in the newspaper, one of the few times that the press covered the issue, and they learned that there was still slavery today. And they said, great thing that, Americans now are all abolitionists. They said, what are we going to do about this? I know that there are many adults, sometimes they hear a debate over slave redemption, and I think that allows them to sort of ignore the issue and say, what can we do? But the kids said, we have to do something about this. And they actually started a campaign that over 100 schools across the country and around the world are involved in. They testified to the Senate with Francis in September. They met with Susan Rice. They actually just met with Madeleine Albright in September. And they've been the ones, more than any other Americans, who've been pushing this forward. It's kids. So you can do a lot. I would tell you the first thing you can do today, I'm going to say it again, tell the president's representative here that he needs to do something about this. The president listens to kids. The second thing I would say is you can educate your parents. I mean, here we are at Harvard University, and as both Jay and I can tell you, there are not classes on this. You can't learn about this. You have to happen to learn about it, and I think that's terrible. I think you can all educate your professors about this. This is for the college students here. Get them to teach about this and discuss it. It's a wonderful thing, actually, when kids can educate their elders. And I think that's a great thing you can do just to spread the word. For more information, I would say go to our website or come up and talk to me afterwards. There's a lot that you can do.
Okay, thank you.
I actually want to follow up, though, because the question really wasn't answered before when it was asked, what 3 specific things? So, letting the president's representative know is not going to influence outcomes as such.
Well, you don't know about that. I think it would actually make a huge difference, and if the president were to say something, it would be enormous. But as I said, I think the 3 main ideas. First of all, educate yourself. There's a lot more to learn about this. You're just getting a small taste of modern-day slavery here. So go to our website, look up books in the library. There's a lot you can learn about the issue. The second thing, as I said, educate your friends and your family, because we need to build an abolitionist movement here in the United States to help set these people free. We're trying to recreate what was in Boston, the center of abolitionism. Finally, I would say that, as I said, slavery now in the global economy touches us in interesting ways. So there are products that come in that you can boycott as a way to put pressure. Actually, being in the global economy empowers us to make a difference, because it lets us influence people around the world and what they do. The other thing is, as you heard, there are many, many cases of slavery here in the U.S., and the people who are uncovering them are ordinary citizens. There was just a case in Quincy in 1992 where it was nurses who happened upon a case of a Sri Lankan woman who was enslaved by a graduate student from Kuwait who was studying at BU. And it was random nurses in Quincy who helped set her free. So I would encourage all of you to be aware that slavery now is an issue here too, and to have your guard up. And if you do suspect any case, you can call our 800 number and we can help you. And there's also a government hotline that was mentioned that you can call.
Yeah, I want to echo the point that's being made about educating yourself and raising awareness about this. When we go around and talk about the problem of trafficking in women, we encounter a pretty incredible level of disbelief. People will say, oh, maybe Nepalese women are being trafficked to India, or maybe that happens somewhere else in the world, but that can't be happening right here in the United States. When in fact it is. Those 4 cases I mentioned are ones that have appeared in the newspapers and many of you know about. There are many, many more instances. As was mentioned, there is a CIA report which documents that between 45 and 50,000 women and children are trafficked into the United States each year. And as Jesse mentioned, it is very often someone who may notice something at their neighbors or someone who's involved in their community who may be the lifeline for a victim of trafficking. So it's really important to learn about it, the problem. I think raising awareness of a problem that is so underground will help us to help many more of the victims than we have been able to help thus far.
Great. Let's go here.
I'm Ahmed Jaylee. I'm Harvard College, class of 98, law school class of 03. And as a human and as a Sudanese, I applaud you for all what you're doing for freedom in Sudan and in the world. But since you're talking about education, I think I do have a couple issues with the way the issue of slavery in Sudan is being addressed. Specifically, I completely disagree with framing the problem in racial or religious terms. And I think if you're going to go and try to educate people, I think it would be very beneficial to get a better grasp of the roots of the problem. And there were a number of historical I think, errors in the statements made tonight. So just in 30 seconds, if we talk about slavery in Sudan, I think there's the well-publicized Arab tribes' raidings of the Dinka in the south. And that's a practice that has been going on for at least 100 years. And this has been intertrading. You have the Rezegat or the Masaida raiding the Dinka, and the Dinka raiding back. Recently, in the last 10, 20 years, it has become one-sided as a result of the war. Secondly, there has been a lot of history of inter-southerner tribal trading between the Dinka and the Nuer. And lastly, and I think you don't really hear about this in the U.S. media, is that the SPLA, which is the Southern rebel army, has abducted thousands and thousands of Southern Sudanese from the Dinka and from other Southern tribes, and they are forced to serve in the rebel army without pay. What I'm trying, I guess, to communicate here is there is no doubt a problem of slavery in Sudan. There's no one-two about it, and we can call it abduction, we can call it slavery. We're not going to argue about that, but I think to frame it in a racial or a religious context is counterproductive. Because as an Arab, as a Muslim, as a Northerner, I think that going about it that way, you're alienating two-thirds of the nation from any effort to eradicate this problem. And then secondly, you're not really cooperating with the majority of Sudan to address the issue. For example, the government of Sudan is being accused of being directly involved in the slavery trade. This is absolutely not true. I think the government of Sudan is definitely guilty, but it's not guilty by action, it's guilty by inaction. And I think that's an important distinction to be made. Thank you.
Okay, would anyone like to respond to that? Go ahead.
Thank you. And I'd love to speak to you more in detail after the discussion ends, so we can talk about how we can be in partnership to end this, people from the north. And because I think one of the we definitely do not want to get into a case where this is putting Christians against Islamic people and people from the north against the south. And actually, I mean, the people that we work with to redeem the slaves are Islamic and are Arab and live on the border of the north and the south of the region, the North Sudan and Bahr el-Ghazal, which is a region in southern Sudan, which is being specifically targeted for the slave raids. And they have decided to go against the government, and I've spoken to them in detail, people who go into the north and risk their lives on a daily basis to purchase the freedom and then bring the slaves to the south. So this is definitely a complex issue, and there are lots of dynamics behind it, and I do look forward to talking to you more about it.
Okay. We have a questioner up in the corner.
Hi, I'm Karen Kalish, a student at the Kennedy School. Francis, thank you so much for bringing your story to us. Jesse, I'm very curious and moved by your freeing 4,435 slaves, and I'm very curious as to how you did it, how much it cost, and most importantly, what has happened to those people.
Does she mean you?
That's me,
Jay.
Jay, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Not a problem. Okay, so really quickly, this is how redemption goes. There was a team of 6 people, myself and Joe Madison, a radio personality in Washington, D.C. We joined 4 staff persons from Christian Solidarity International and flew from Switzerland into Nairobi, then took a small chartered plane into Bahr el-Ghazal in Sudan. And what basically happens is we meet, our 6-person team meets the slaves who have been brought from the north rather, by the Arab retrievers that I spoke of earlier. And it's basically the way they get to the south is through a system much like the Underground Railroad in the United States, in that slaves who have either escaped or slaves who have been purchased by the Arab retrievers are marched by night and sleep and hidden by day in safe havens that the Arab retrievers have set up along with other Dinka people along the way. And then they're marched, which usually a 14-day mission, to a site that has been predetermined in the South. And there, the transaction, as far as us purchasing giving the retrievers $33 per slave, which is equivalent to 50,000 Sudanese pounds, which in Sudanese currency, that rate remains flat. So it's not based on economics at all. But we're giving the retrievers the funds because they've either had to purchase the slaves out of slavery, rather, and they also have to provide food and medicines along the way. And then after the slaves are documented and fingerprinted, so we know that slaves aren't being redeemed twice, and that hasn't happened to this point, the slaves are freed and go back to their families who have been waiting patiently around the redemption site, and then they go back to their villages. And in the case that there's no family members, they go back and are under the care of the community. And I've been to something like an orphanage where children are taken care of very well by the community. There's no way to prevent a raid from occurring again, and that they might be abducted again. But it's just a temporary solution, but one that the Sudanese people have called for.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ari Weinstein, a junior in the college. I was wondering if you think that the model you used to free 4,000 plus slaves could be viable on a large scale, and also if you have any ideas how you could prevent the problem of slaves being re-enslaved once you've freed them.
Should I take that? First of all, I believe the program so far has freed 38,000 people over the last 4 years. It's a program that, from my understanding, has grew slowly. So it's not one that our organization runs. We do support it, but it started much smaller. I think 15 people were redeemed on the first mission. And by the way, I like to call it financing an underground railroad. It's really an indigenous practice. It's the result of a peace treaty between the local Arab and African tribes. Really, if you think about it in terms of the Underground Railroad that helped slaves escape here in the U.S., you get a much better idea of what happens. The people you see in the pictures are actually retrievers. They're not slave traders. And they're compensated a flat fee for everyone they bring back, whether they had to buy them out or whether they helped them escape. So it has been viable on a larger scale. The last couple missions have all redeemed about 4,000. It's not the solution, though, to the problem, and that's why I almost don't want to dwell on it too long. It's like a small Band-Aid for a big wound. It's been an important way to bring immediate relief, to get attention finally for the issue. I have to say the media has not been interested in covering this very much. That feature on NBC Dateline you saw still today prevents other news organizations from covering it. I've talked to people at 60 Minutes who say, well, we want to do it, but Dateline already did that. And that was 4 years ago. So you can imagine what we're up against. But the story gets told, and it's a way to people like Jay, for those people who we can get out to tell their story.
So if that is the Band-Aid solution, what is the broader solution? I mean, how do you stop it? I mean, is it working through the Sudanese government? Is that the wrong way? Is it building civil society?
Well, in the case of Sudan, clearly what you need is a just peace, a peace that solves the conflict. That, by the way, in this program, the other good thing about the redemption program is that it does foster coexistence and provides incentives for different ethnic and religious groups to get along, which I think is very important. So that's one aspect. But on the larger issue, beyond Sudan, I think we need to build an abolitionist movement again, and that's what we're doing. And I should say that there are many, many Harvard students who are involved in that. And I want to again stress that the education that all of you have, which is really a wonderful thing, is also a burden. And we're actually working on some very interesting projects. We have lots of internships available, programs actually using the internet to publicize and help fight slavery. And we need the skills that you have to help make that happen. So aside from just building awareness and making a movement here, there are specific individual things you can do through our organization and other groups. And I would encourage anyone who wants more information to come up and talk to us.
And if I could just add, on the broader point of how to stop the trade in human beings, that it's occurring worldwide, there are studies that have shown that, I mentioned earlier that this is increasingly perpetrated by international organized crime networks. And there are studies that show that this is one of the fastest growing areas of profits for organized crime. You tend to think of trafficking in drugs or guns, but trafficking in human beings is also a fast growing area of profits. And that's why we are very hopeful that this UN protocol, which I mentioned earlier, can be an effective tool, because it does require signatories to actually criminalize in their own countries the practice of trafficking, one of the problems we have is that there aren't adequate laws to actually punish people for engaging in this horrible practice. And hopefully the combination of a protocol that will require people to actually criminalize this, combined with some real protections and essential services for victims, will begin a process of creating not only a series of national laws around the world that are effective, but a template for better coordination internationally by law enforcement, also by NGOs, because when, for example, a woman who has been trafficked is going to go back home, she's going to need assistance in terms of her repatriation and her safe reintegration into her home country. So we have a lot of work to do, but we are very hopeful that this protocol will set a framework for us to be able to cooperate internationally in a better way to really make a difference in stopping those who are profiting from the illegal trade in human beings.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anjan Roy. I wanted to thank this organization for doing this. Extremely, extremely impressed. You've brought us a very real case that this is real, and you've also emphasized that this is a global problem affecting every single planet. I mean, every single place on the planet, rather, and even right here in the Boston area. What I wanted to ask you about, speaking of the interconnectedness, is to what extent are Western corporations or Western economic entities benefiting or using slave labor in their companies? I know you spoke about the Amazon, and I've heard that McDonald's is quite brutal with the cutting down of rainforests around the world, and Nike, of course, is they're notorious for their sneaker factories in Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia, and I think you mentioned something about perhaps even the aluminum sitting in these chairs. So, to what extent are you familiar with or aware of the U.S. economy's dependence and use of, or the world economy's dependence and use of, but in particular the U.S. economy, because that's where we are, use of slave labor? Slave labor, as you mentioned, is extremely profitable, so you don't even need very much. And just a little bit of slave labor, if it's at 90% margins, 90% profit margins, you don't need to be a business student to know that that can, if you have a very small part of your overall revenue stream, but at 90% margin, that can really affect your bottom line.
Okay, so anyone want to address that question or that issue?
First of all, I don't think the U.S. economy depends on slave labor, but often it's through, there's a middle organization in between, or several steps. So the carpets or the cigarettes coming from India are going through a series of middlemen and importers. But there's certainly a supply chain. I would say that the case that Wendy mentioned in Los Angeles with the Thai immigrants, they were in this, it's really beyond even a sweatshop. They were literally enslaved in a house in the suburbs, and they were making clothes that had labels on them that said Filene's and Macy's. So check the tag on your clothes. So there are a few very immediate instances where that happens. An example of the global economy, also, I have to say, against fighting apartheid, there was a very effective tool of divestment. And people from our organization, including there's some Harvard students who spearheaded this, have launched a divestment campaign against some Canadian oil companies, one in particular, Talisman, that's drilling oil in Sudan, and actually to clear the oil fields, which are primarily in the southern area. Slave raids are being used to clear the indigenous population. And that oil company is actually traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and TIA Craft, which was the Harvard and everywhere else's professors' pension fund, had stock in Talisman. And actually students from a bunch of area Boston schools organized a big protest last year. Jay was actually one of the speakers, and 4 days later, TIA Craft divested from Talisman. So there are cases where students have actually made a direct difference in influencing the global economy, either directly or indirectly.
Okay, we only have about 10 more minutes left, so I'll begin here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Melina Tran. I'm from Boston Evening Cavity. This question is for the woman that worked for the government.
Wendy Patton.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. In this paper, a child had asked why President Clinton remained silent. So I want to ask you, if Bush was elected, you think he would do something about this?
Why President Clinton what?
He was silent.
Why Clinton remained silent?
I don't know. Jesse commented earlier, I think you've been following probably more closely than I have the comments of both of our putative president-elects about the their policy on Sudan, right?
They've both refused to answer the question. And you're going to make them answer that question. Especially when whoever it is, whether it's Al Gore or George Bush, and they come here, I want you guys to come up and ask them that question. Make them have to answer it.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Ed.
Hi, my name is Ricken Patel. I'm a second-year student at the Kennedy School. I'm a Canadian. And I'm responding to Jesse's invocations, which I thought were very well placed, and asking our distinguished representative from the National Security Council. Obviously, you've demonstrated your commitment to this issue by coming here, and that's certainly not doubt. And none of us know the constraints you face in your job. But I think it would be a wonderful thing if you were to let us know honestly what kind of message you'll take back to the President from this meeting.
I will absolutely take back your message to my colleagues who work on our Africa policy, that there is a desire to see even stronger and more forceful statements on this issue. I will absolutely bring that message back.
Okay, go ahead.
My name's Chris Howell. My question is, what are the cultural effects of slavery, both locally in communities and on a larger scale in Sudan and around the world?
What do you mean, cultural effects?
How is the local, for example, the Dinka culture affected in local villages and as a whole? How is it changed or destroyed, for that matter, by the slave trade?
Would anyone like to comment on that?
I don't know what she's asking me.
Well, I mean, I think you've seen the case of Francis, just to use one example. I mean, he was ripped apart from his parents, and he'd never seen them again, and as far as he knows, they were killed, as were most of his family members. So you can imagine that it destroys the fabric, especially with the slave raids, of the Dinka society. Around the world, it depends. In India and in Brazil, and even here, there are different contexts and different cases, but clearly the cultural effects are not good. I would say maybe turn it around and say, what are the cultural effects for us, though, if we don't do anything when we know about this? And I'm more worried about the effects for American society if Americans learn that there's slavery around the world and choose to not be particularly active. I don't think we're going to do that. We're an abolitionist nation, and when people like the high school students you heard here learn about this, they respond. They know that it's wrong. And I'm concerned that the leadership, unfortunately, has not had the right response to this issue.
Okay.
Just briefly, you mentioned Sudan. What I've seen when I was in Sudan is just that, I mean, you can picture it if a mother is taken away and the children are left, or vice versa. If men of the village are killed and then the remaining people are just left who have managed to hide or run away are just left, obviously it disrupts the culture very much, but like Jesse said, it's the next step in how we take what we know and change it into a cultural impact here.
Okay, just two more questions. Go ahead here.
Hello, my name is Laura Ben, and I'm also, like Ahmed, I'm also from Sudan. My father is from southern Sudan, like Francis, a Dinka, and my mother's American, so it makes me a little of both. I just wanted to comment on the comment of Ahmed, basically regarding, I agree with Ahmed that the situation is very complex in Sudan. There are deep historical roots, etc. But to deny the role of the government in the militia raids and the subsequent enslavement of civilians, as we just heard from Francis's testimony, I think really questions the morale, the ethics of the person holding that view. The government, since 1986, before this government actually declared jihad on southern Sudan and encouraged local Arab tribes to raid southern villages and focus primarily on the Dinka, because the Dinka constitute the bulk of the rebel force that is fighting for self-determination for southern Sudan. I don't want to get into too much detail, but basically to deny the governmental role, I think, really signifies a serious crisis here. Last year, a year ago, the United States government, the Congress actually passed a resolution declaring the situation in Sudan a genocide. So my comment to the United States governmental representative is, we're not just talking about slavery here, we're talking about slavery that is part of a campaign of genocide against the inhabitants of southern Sudan, and primarily focused on the Dinka, as I said, because they are the largest group and the most rebellious to the government. And also there is a very strong, to counter-argue against what Ahmed claimed, there's a very strong religious and racial component here. The racial component, historically in Sudan, the word Abid is used liberally to this day to refer to a Southern Sudanese. I have stories, I have many stories I could give, but I won't. And religion is also a fundamental at the core of the conflict, and it's also related to the slavery. And you cannot enslave a fellow Muslim, but you can enslave, I mean, it's problematic to enslave in general, but there are no prohibitions against enslaving someone who's not a Muslim in the context of war. So this is what we have going on in Southern Sudan. And as Francis's testimony made clear, there is an element of religion. He was forced to convert. He was beaten if he didn't pray. So please, whatever you say about the situation, do not deny the religious element, do not deny the racial element, and do not deny that this is part of a governmental campaign of genocide. Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to get some responses from our panelists, but it does tie into my earlier point that a British ambassador is walking around the country saying the opposite of what Laura just said, and one of the things that should be on the agenda is clarity about what it is we're talking about. So go ahead and whoever would like to respond on the panel to that comment.
Did you want to say something?
Well, I'm not going to answer all the detail what she said. I think she's really not everything what we're talking about in this situation about Southern Sudanese people. We've been enslaved to North. She's the one, like you said, she was born in Sudan. And she just moved here because her mom was from America. And she knows a lot. Now what she said is, I think some are true. But the one thing I want to say now is, like when she said that the Northern Sudanese compare Southern Sudanese to not, I really don't understand that way, but from my understanding, what I heard of what she said is, she says it's not about government, it's not about religions, but I think both of these things, they are very important. That was the Arab who they used to want to kill us and the want to finish Southern Sudanese, not just particular Dinka tribe. There's so many tribes in Southern Sudan. This is about religion. Like everybody, when you watch it, the BCR, you saw what's going on, where you call it jihad. This is what happened. This is what happened to me. For 10 years I was slave. I became a Muslim, but I'm not a Muslim before I was 7 years. And I did that was by force because they said you have to be. And I said no. They said we will kill you. And this has happened to me. I said yes, but this is not really my heart. But I did because I want to save my life to be free. This is a fair thing. I said, even in the face of one of them, even one of Northern Sudanese is here in this building, I said, this is not true. This is about war and about genocide, not about religions. I would say, no, this is the religion. The convert has to be Muslims by force. And a lot of us Dinka tribe, they are Muslim now, even in America here, because they were being changed so many years ago and never going to change again. And this is important thing we're talking. Second thing about government in Southern Sudan, in Northern Sudan. The government of Khartoum knows what's going on to Southern Sudanese. Even in slavery, the people we call them militia, Arab, they really don't live in the city, in the Khartoum, in the capital. But they live outside like villages, like us. And the government now, when they went to Southern Sudan to bring slaves, they told them to bring some to sell in the capital, in the Khartoum. And government know about it. And they never talk about that. So this is all the thing. We don't want to leave this and we want to tell people to know. And this is why we said government of Sudan does not really care about what's going on in the part of the country.
I just want to say one thing to the issue of clarity. Sure. We met with Malin Albright in September a year ago. And a bunch of leaders said what you heard from Laura. This is a genocide. The Congress has said so. And Malin Albright turned to her assistant and she said, tell them why we can't use the word genocide. And he said, well, because if you say genocide, that means we have to do something. So Malin Albright has said, she's made it quite clear, if they said genocide, they would have to act. I've heard Ambassador Gulti speak. It's in the context of a UN system where Sudan first of all, has a vote and is part of a major bloc, the Arab League, and the slaves have no seat at the UN. I do want to say that for all the talk of religious conflict, as Jay made very clear, the Underground Railroad Slave Redemption Program is driven by both racial and religious coexistence. And so I don't want this to be a chance to stigmatize, but we should be clear. This is slavery, and this is an attempt at genocide, and the US government is not talking about it because they'd have to do something, and they don't think that you want them to do anything, and you have to tell them otherwise.
All right. Okay, we have time for one last question.
Okay, I was going to say, it doesn't take a Harvard degree to realize that if you target somebody because they're black and because they're Christian, that is simple racism. And the same thing went on in Bosnia, obviously. And my question to you is, it's directed to that gentleman right there.
Jay.
We can launch, and to you as well, we can launch all these committees, come up with these, great names, and pretend like we're actually going to come up with a solution to this issue. But it seems like all this is just floating around the issue. We're not targeting congressmen. And that's the only way to get America involved. And I wanted to let you two know that 25 to 30 freshman congressmen will be at Harvard 10 days from now to learn how to become congressmen. And then they'll all go into the new session in January. And I want to know how you can help me and help the Reverend over here talk to these congressmen and show them that this is an issue they can get attention. So they can get reelected, because that's really what they care about at the end of the day, that this is an issue that needs to be cared about. And I want to know how you will help me bring this to their attention to actually come up with a solution to this problem.
Anyone on the panel can answer that.
I don't think you need any help. You're all ready to go.
I'm not joking around. I think we should come up with a plan, because in 10 days they're going to be here. And if you can sit down on the car ride, because every single one of them is coming from the airport to here, and their students are going to be in these car rides. And if you can educate and just get one congressman to listen, and he brings it up on the floor, and he feels like he can get attention from it, and he can get reelected, this is going to come from an issue that a bunch of, liberal people, like, I don't know what's going to do, to something that's actually going to happen with money to get these people free in the Sudan.
So can we talk after? Yeah, first of all, that's the passion that we need. I want to talk to you afterwards. There's going to be, we're going to get something done, regardless. So we're going to be here when those 25 congressmen come, and we're going to make a difference, right?
All right. All right, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you so much to all of our panelists.
Francis.